The next day the group sets off straight to the town where the new Atelier workshop was supposed to be established. However, Yuli Xia still hadn't mentioned who the new Atelier master would be, so Kanz was particularly eager to meet this mysterious person. Yuli Xia of course can't just tell the truth, so she starts giving excuses. At this point Sina has already figured out that Yuli Xia didn't bring their party along out of the kindness, and when Kanz asked about the master, Yuli Xia got all weird, which only made Sina more suspicious. As they approached the town, Kurt suddenly realized it was the same place where he had repaired the wall. Given his misunderstanding that the Margrave had dismissed him for poor work, returning here filled him with anxiety. Eventually, Yuli Xia led the group directly to the site intended for the Atelier workshop, but calling it a workshop felt ridiculous. The area was nothing more than an empty plot of land. Kanz bluntly pointed out that they couldn't exactly run a shop from an empty land, and Yuli Xia quickly reassured him she was aware of that. Instead, Yuli Xia explained the group would wait at an inn until Kurt finished building the Atelier workshop himself. Turning to Kurt, Yuli Xia asked if Kurt could finish it by the end of the day. However, Kurt felt this was far too unreasonable. Even with his skills, a single day just wasn't enough, but Kurt estimated he'd probably need at least 3 days. Understanding his position, Yuli Xia immediately told Kurt to take all the time he needed, emphasizing that there was no rush. Yuli Xia also told him that if he required additional materials, she was ready to provide anything he requested. Kurt was relieved to hear this and promptly produced a list of materials he had already prepared in his mind. Yuli Xia took the paper and glanced over the items, things like amethyst and griffin feathers, which immediately caught Sina's attention. Sina couldn't understand why such rare materials were necessary just to build a simple workshop. However, Yuli Xia had learned by now not to question Kurt's methods. Yuli Xia simply assured him she'd do her best to obtain everything he requested. Unfortunately, collecting these materials would take a couple of days, but Kurt was totally okay with waiting. Sina still has this weird good feeling that something fishy is going on, and Yuli Xia can tell she is onto her. But neither of them says anything and just plays it cool for now. Finally, Yuli Xia instructed everyone to head to the inn, allowing Kurt to work undisturbed. However, before leaving him to his task, Yuli Xia gently reminded Kurt to take care of himself, making him promise that he'd return to the inn by nightfall to rest and eat properly. Meanwhile, once everyone arrived at the inn, Yuli Xia gathered them together, explaining that she had something important to share. Until now, Kanz and Danzu assumed Kurt was just an ordinary person, but Yuli Xia knew she couldn't hide the truth indefinitely, especially since Sina had already witnessed Kurt's extraordinary abilities. Then Sina immediately asked Yuli Xia to tell them exactly who Kurt was, but Yuli Xia hesitated, wanting to introduce herself formally. Yuli Xia took out her royal family crest, revealing to them that she was actually an adventurer in service of the royal family. Then, gesturing to the girls seated across from them, Yuli Xia introduced Lise as the third princess of the kingdom. Kanz, Danzu, and Sina were all stunned by this revelation. Kanz awkwardly stood up, unsure if he should greet Lise properly, but the princess reassured him that formalities weren't necessary, since Lise kept her identity hidden. Lise gently asked them to treat her like any ordinary girl. Considering Lisa's royal status, Sina quickly asked if that means Kurt is a noble too, but Yuli Xia clarified that Kurt wasn't royal or noble, he was just a regular civilian. Yuli Xia confessed that she didn't fully understand Kurt's background. However, Yuli Xia knew that all his combat skills were officially G rank, while literally every other skill he possessed was rated at an unbelievable SSS rank. Kanz, Danzu, and Sina were speechless, finding it hard to believe such legendary skill levels could even exist, though it made perfect sense after witnessing Kurt in action. Yuli Xia continued emphasizing that Kurt's true abilities were classified information and none of them were permitted to discuss it with anyone. Even Kurt himself wasn't aware of the truth. Yuli Xia and Mimiko had lied to him, telling him he was only at B rank. Moreover, Yuli Xia revealed that Kurt was actually intended to become the new Atelier master, although she had no plans of telling him the real reason behind this. Hearing this, Sina suddenly stood up, angrily confronting Yuli Xia about her deception. Sina couldn't understand why Yuli Xia would lie to Kurt, especially about something important. Yuli Xia tried to justify herself by suggesting that Kurt wouldn't believe the truth even if she told him. Sina wasn't buying that explanation and got angry at Yuli Xia, saying that it was a ridiculous excuse. Then Yuli Xia attempted another justification, claiming she was merely trying to protect Kurt, because if his true abilities became public knowledge, others would surely exploit him. But Sina countered sharply, stating that from her point of view, Yuli Xia was the one exploiting. Unable to respond to Sina's accusations, Yuli Xia fell silent. Sina is disgusted by the situation. She turned to Kanz and made it clear she wanted nothing more to do with this entire mess. After a short silence, Danza asked Lise to explain a bit more about their situation. Lise nodded and told them that Kurt had broken a deadly curse placed on her just a few days ago, and he'd done it simply by giving her a bowl of porridge. Someone was after Lisa's life, so they devised this scheme to set up an Atelier master. They planned to draw the assassins out, identify the culprit, and finally end it. Of course, Kurt wasn't aware of any of this yet. Lise understood that it seemed selfish to drag Kurt into their plan without telling him, but she assured them that she and Yuli Shia deeply cared about Kurt and would never intentionally put him in harm's way. Lise asked them earnestly if they'd be willing to keep this secret and join forces with them to ensure Kurt's safety. Danza took a moment before responding, clarifying that as adventurers they were obligated to follow the orders of any royalty. Still, since Kurt was their friend, they'd do anything necessary to protect him. Kans quickly echoed Danza's sentiment, reassuring Lise they were fully on board. Lise was relieved to hear they would help, but Sina still thought this was too much, considering they'd known Kurt for barely 2 days. Yuli Shia understood exactly how Sina felt after all, even though Yuli Shia talked about Kurt as if they were old friends. But she'd only met him last week. To this day, Yuli Shia still finds it hard to believe the incredible things she'd seen Kurt do. Sina excused herself, saying she needed to walk to clear her head before making any decisions. As Sina wandered through town, she found herself heading toward Kurt's worksite. Sina felt strongly that Kurt deserved to know the truth about his strength, but as she approached, Sina froze, completely shocked by what she saw. In just a few short hours since they left, Kurt had already laid down the entire foundation for the workshop by himself. Sina approached Kurt, asking if he really built all of this alone. Kurt casually confirmed and thought this was normal since Yuli Shia had told him he was only B-rank. Sina stared at him in disbelief because no B-ranked worker could have pulled off something like this so quickly. It dawned on her that Kurt's perception of ranks was completely wrong, especially since he'd grown up in a village where building a dozen houses in a single day was considered normal. By his standards, Kurt actually felt he was going a bit too slow. Still, Sina couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't right for Yuli Shia to keep Kurt in the dark and have him do all this work. Sina asked him if he felt resentful considering the heavy load that had suddenly been placed on his shoulders. Kurt just smiled softly and shook his head. Kurt explained to her that he had no reason to be upset because Kurt actually enjoyed being useful. Back when Kurt was part of the hero party, they constantly belittled him, calling him useless and eventually kicking him out entirely. But here, everyone recognized his worth, which made Kurt happier than he could express. Meanwhile, Danzu is hanging around the town square for a meeting with a trusted informant, who just so happens to look a lot like Bandana. Remember how Danzu's party hired Kurt after their original porter got sick? Well, turns out that wasn't just bad luck. The so-called porter Bibinok was actually a spy planted in their group to tear them apart. Apparently, some jealous adventurers who couldn't stand how successful Danzu's team was had paid him off to sabotage them. The informant already tracked Bibinok down and left clear directions for where to find him, so now Danza can do whatever he wants with that information. Danza pays her for the solid intel and heads out to a local tavern later that day. Sitting at one of the tables is a bald scum who is sulking into his drink. Not only did the waitress give him a dirty look when he tried to grope her, but his whole plot to wipe out Danza's crew also flopped hard. Still, Bibinok is already cooking up a new scheme and recently caught wind that Danza's party is now working with an Atelier workshop with ties to the third princess. If Bibinok plays his cards right, targeting them now could score him a fat payday. That's when Danza speaks up from the shadows and asks if he is enjoying what might be his last drink. Bibinok hears that voice freeze and then bolts for the door. Bibinok runs off to the alley in panic but doesn't get far because he trips right over a perfectly placed wire and crashes to the ground hard. Danza strolls toward him without rushing. At first, Danza brushed off Bibinok's sketchy excuse when he called in sick for that mining job, but now it's crystal clear that the whole thing was part of a setup. Bibinok tries to fake innocence, acting like he doesn't know what Danza's talking about. But it's too late for that lie. Danza draws his sword and takes a swing at Bibinok's neck, but stops just short. Danza decides not to spill blood, at least not tonight. Instead, Danza leans in close and tells Bibinok to stay away from him and his team because if he shows his face again, Danza swears he won't hesitate next time. Danza walks off and not far behind, Bandana watches from around a corner. Bandana is frustrated that Danza didn't finish Bibinok off because that guy's gonna be a problem later. So she figures she'll just take care of it herself. But before Bandana can make a move, two hooded figures suddenly show up and start taking Bibinok away. Bandana instantly recognizes them. They're part of the Phantom Squad, a unit that reports directly to Mimiko. Now Bandana is really wondering why a royal court mage would be mixed up in something like this. That's when her messenger Crow shows up with a letter from her superior, telling her to back off since this whole situation falls under Marlfus' authority. That's another disappointment for Bandana, but orders are orders. So with nothing left for her to do here, she gets ready to head back to Kurt's village. But speaking of Marlfus, things aren't going too well for her because she has been captured and is trapped inside a magic circle. Back in town, Danzu and Kans wake up the next day and are completely blown away when they see what Kurt built. Kurt even managed to add trees and shrubs, and they have no damn clue how he got them to grow overnight. Everyone is stunned except Lise, who's off in her own little world, daydreaming about marrying Kurt and living with him here forever. Then Kurt walks out to say good morning and invites them inside. Kurt gives them a full tour of the place, starting with the entrance, then showing off the 2 basement floors and even the custom water purification system, which he built using magic gems. Kurt also ensured everyone had rooms and a special wand reserved for the Atelier Master. Speaking of the Master, Kurt still has no clue that it's supposed to be him. Yuli Shia doesn't want to drop that on him yet, so she quickly makes up a story about the Atelier Master being delayed. Then Yuli Shia switches and casually asks Kurt where his room is. But Kurt, with his usual low self-esteem, says he doesn't need one. Kurt figured he could live in a broom closet since all he is really good for is running errands. Of course, everyone immediately shuts that down and insists Kurt should use the Atelier Master's room instead, since it's just sitting empty. But convincing him takes 2 full hours. Then Yuli Shia asks Kurt if he could set up a barrier around the house to help block out any curses, but Kurt has never made a barrier before, so he is not even sure if that is something he can pull off. In that case, Yuli Shia figures she'll just have to rely on the backup ward spells that Mimiko left behind, so Yuli Shia spends the whole night placing them around the property individually. The final seal has to go outside Lisa's room, so Yuli Shia heads over and sticks it up. But the second Lise hears footsteps out in the hallway, she assumes Kurt is trying to sneak into her room, and Lise practically sprints to the door ready to greet him with open arms. But when Lise sees it's just Yuli Shia, she is super let down since Lise was clearly hoping to rope Kurt into cuddling with her for the night. Yuli Shia tells her to cut the weird fantasies and warns her not to mess with Kurt's innocent head, especially since he is the kind of guy who'd do anything just to feel useful. The next day, Kurt's busy in the kitchen cooking breakfast for everyone when Lise strolls out wearing only an apron. Yuli Shia loses it and tells her to stop trying to corrupt the poor guy. But Lise shrugs it off, saying she has got clothes on underneath. Barely, but still. Once breakfast is ready, the group sits down to eat, and everyone's blown away by how good the food tastes. But Yuli Shia notices something weird: Kurt isn't there with them. Lise says she heard him talk about wanting to clean up some graffiti someone drew on the mansion walls. Yuli Shia freezes because that graffiti he mentioned was definitely the set of barrier spells she placed last night. Normally no one could just scrub off a word with a rag, but this is Kurt we're talking about, so she rushes out in a panic to stop him, but Yuli Shia is already too late. Kurt has wiped out every single spell, and he still thinks it was just some random graffiti someone drew on the walls. Yuli Shia had never told him about the curse assassination attempt targeting Lise, so now Lise is completely exposed to curses again. With Mimiko gone, there's nobody around to give another set of barrier seals, so now Yuli Shia has no idea what to do next. Meanwhile, Marlfus had been summoned to a meeting with the church's bishop. The moment Marlfus arrives, Bishop bluntly informs her that she is being excommunicated. Stunned, Marlfus demands to know the reason behind this decision. The bishop explains that numerous complaints and solid evidence have surfaced regarding the violent and destructive behavior of the flaming dragon Thong. To make matters worse, Bishop recently received word that Galnova has been declared a wanted criminal, and the church wants to sever all ties with her before things escalate further. Marlfus tries desperately to plead her case, insisting that she personally hasn't done anything wrong aside from that one incident where Marlfus casually electrocuted a minimum wage waiter with level 5 lightning magic. But in her defense, Marlfus argues the food he served was absolutely terrible, so he totally deserved it. That excuse would never hold up in court. But the bishop wasn't a saint. Sensing an opportunity, Bishop tells Marlfus that he is willing to turn a blind eye to her minor sins and even promote her to the rank of priest, but only if she does one little favor for him. The moment Marlfus hears the promotion to priest, Marlfus's eyes practically light up and she eagerly agrees to whatever Bishop asks. However, the situation takes an unexpected turn. The bishop casually pours a glass of wine and offers it to her, which Marlfus drinks without question. Then, instead of anything close to what Marlfus imagined, the bishop calmly tells her that he wants her to assassinate the third princess of the kingdom. Marlfus would normally have refused outright, but by the time she realizes the truth, it's too late. The wine was laced with a deadly curse ensuring a slow, agonizing death unless she complies. Cornered with no other way out, Marlphys swears loyalty to the bishop's plan. Unfortunately, this includes sealing her inside a magic circle alongside a demon to guarantee her obedience. Back at Kurt's mansion, things are a lot more peaceful. Everyone is enjoying a hearty breakfast. Surprisingly, Lise hasn't suffered from any new curses, despite Kurt accidentally wiping out all the old protective spells. Yulia still hasn't figured out why no new curses have been placed on Lise yet, but since Kurt's magic-infused cooking has powerful purification properties, it's likely neutralizing any attempts before they take hold. Either way, it looks like Lise's safety isn't in jeopardy anymore, especially now that Mimiko has finally arrived in town. With Ophelia's help, they've begun leading a sophisticated information network to sniff out anyone plotting against Lise. Lise soon notices that there's something a little different about the cake Kurt made today, and Kurt explains that he used rice flour instead of regular wheat flour. Lise loves the flavor because it reminds her of the rice porridge Kurt made for her back when they first met. So Lise excitedly asks if Kurt would be willing to make it for her again if she ever got cursed. Kurt warmly tells her he would be happy to make as much rice porridge as she wants, though Kurt assures her that Lise doesn't have to worry about being cursed anymore. Hearing this, Yulia looks a little surprised and asks Kurt how he can be so confident, especially when Kurt told her earlier that he couldn't set up any anti-curse barriers. Kurt confirms that while he can't install barriers inside the mansion, it's only because the entire house already functions as one massive curse barrier. Any curse-based magic cast at them will automatically be reflected at the sender, although Kurt made a few personal adjustments. As fate would have it, at that exact moment one of the assassins targeting Lise decides to launch a new curse. The magician starts the ritual for his most powerful curse yet, but instead of hitting Lise, the magic immediately backfires. The curse dissipates harmlessly and rebounds onto the caster, which makes his body glow forever like an electric lamp. Kurt had set up the barrier to retaliate this way specifically because he didn't want to kill anyone outright, no matter how much they might deserve it, and this seemed like a far more humane alternative. Yulia is once again left speechless by Kurt's incredible skill. Yulia is relieved to see that Kurt is doing so much to protect Lise. However, Yulia knows she needs to inform Ophelia and Mimiko immediately so they can track down anyone who suddenly looks like an electric lamp. Since Yulia will be tied up for a while, Kurt casually strolls over to Lise and asks if she would like to go shopping with him. Lise is stunned because this is practically the same as asking her out on a date, but Kurt simply thought it might be nice to walk through the city, especially since Lise hasn't had a chance to leave the mansion yet. Overwhelmed but touched, Lise thanks him for the offer. However, considering the current situation, Lise regretfully tells him she can't go out at all. At the same time, atop the city walls, Margrave Alriad and his Vice General Generic are surveying the horizon with growing concern. It appears that a massive horde of monsters is advancing toward the city. Still, they probably don't need to panic just yet because the walls have been fully repaired and their army stands ready to defend immediately. At the same moment, Yulia, Mimiko, and Ophelia finally track down the human light bulb, but unfortunately it seems his comrades killed him. They must have realized that dragging a glowing corpse around would attract too much attention. Yulia is surprised that Kurt's glowing curse remains active even after death. Seeing how impressive that is for a spell Kurt whipped up on short notice, Ophelia suggests they just come clean to Kurt and ask for his help, making finding the assassins much easier. But Yulia hesitates, saying she doesn't want to drag Kurt into this any more than Yulia already has, even though she knows deep down that he is already too involved. Just then, alarm bells start ringing all across the city. The monsters have begun their assault. Upon the walls, the Margrave orders his soldiers to fire off light spells to illuminate the battlefield, and when the light reveals what's coming, his heart sinks. An endless horde of skeletons is slowly advancing toward the walls, and there is no way his troops can hold the line against that many. Realizing this, Alriad commands a portion of his forces to stay behind and fight to the death if necessary, buying time while the rest focus on evacuating as many civilians as possible. The Margrave is fully prepared to lay down his life for his people, but just as the skeletons reach the outer walls, something incredible happens. They begin vanishing one after another, dissolving into nothingness. The Margrave has no clue what is going on until it hits him. Kurt rebuilt this section of the wall. Somehow Kurt must have put something into the walls that purifies the monsters, so the entire skeleton army is wiped out without a single casualty. Meanwhile, we see Marlphys still trapped within the demon's magic circle. The bishop had made a pact with this advanced class demon, fueling its summoning magic with Marlphys's mana. With the first wave failing miserably, the demon begins preparing even more skeletons, planning to keep draining Marlphys's life force until there's nothing left of her. Back inside the city, Kurt has just gotten word of the attack and asks Shia if they will be alright. Shia explains that monsters on all sides now surround the entire city. While the knights are scrambling to form a counterattack, there's only so much they can do given the situation. Right now the city hasn't fallen yet because a huge chunk of the skeletons were purified when they set foot near the walls. Kurt explains that he enchanted the walls during the repairs, and honestly stuff like this was considered basic maintenance back in his village. Kurt is surprised that people here have never thought about enchanting their walls. That said, Kurt only got to reinforce 2 of the city's 4 walls. If the skeletons shift their attack to the unprotected sections, they'll quickly break through the city walls. Then Lise does the logical thing and politely asks Kurt to whip up a weapon to wipe out all the skeletons. Kurt starts seriously considering it, but before he can say anything, Shia abruptly says she must step out for a while. Before leaving, Shia sternly reminds Kurt and Lise that they are forbidden from stepping outside the mansion under any circumstances. Lise is more than happy with that arrangement. After all, it means she gets to enjoy some uninterrupted time alone with Kurt. Meanwhile, Shia heads to the storage room and grabs a box full of the powerful magic crystals Kurt had previously crafted. Armed with her secret weapon, Shia, Ophelia, and Mimiko rush over to meet with the Margrave. Alried immediately recognizes Shia since they're old acquaintances, but Alried is stunned to see her here of all places. Shia wastes no time getting to the point where she plans to stop the skeleton invasion. Since the monsters seem to be spawning from the nearby ruins, Shia proposes striking the source directly and destroying it. Of course, for that to happen, Alried and his soldiers will need to act as a diversion, drawing the skeletons away from the ruins long enough for her team to reach it. Alried thinks the plan is hazardous and hesitates to approve it, but Shia reassures him with full confidence, revealing one of Kurt's magic crystals. Shia explains that one of these stones carries enough destructive power to level an entire building, more than enough to obliterate the ruins and cut off the skeleton army at its roots. Seeing Shia's determination, Alried ultimately agrees, but under one condition. Alried insists on joining the strike team himself. Shia knows Alried is no slouch regarding combat, but still asks if he is truly prepared to put his life on the line. Alried doesn't back down because as far as he is concerned, it's his sworn duty to protect the city. Besides his Vice General Generic, handling the command of the main force, and Mimiko and Ophelia, guarding the civilians, he can afford to go personally. At the same time, in the mansion, Kurt finishes sweeping the garden when he starts thinking about what Lise has said earlier regarding making a weapon. With that in mind, Kurt heads toward the forge he built and gets straight to work. Kurt mentioned that blacksmiths could craft incredible weapons in his village with such effortless skill. While Kurt struggles with his confidence, he is determined to be useful to his friends. No matter what it takes, Kurt will give it everything he has to forge a proper weapon. At the same time, Shia and Alried are preparing to set out, but they find their path blocked by a horde of monsters. Thinking quickly, Shia pulls out one of the magic crystals Kurt made and readies it. Shia warns the soldiers to close their eyes, and the moment the crystal strikes the ground, a blinding flash of light completely wipes out the monsters. Shia had known Kurt's crystals were powerful, but Shia never expected them to purify so many enemies all at once. Regardless, it plays to their advantage, clearing the way for the soldiers to hold off the next wave, while Shia and Alried make their way toward the ruins. Back at the mansion, Kurt has just finished forging the blade, but after carefully putting the final touches on it, old insecurities start creeping back into his mind. Kurt was told once that his blacksmithing was only B rank, and deep down he still doubts whether a sword he made could ever be good enough to fight real monsters. A few minutes later, Lise comes looking for Kurt to ask him about dinner, but then her eyes fall on the sword Kurt holds, and Lise immediately thinks it looks beautiful. Seeing her reaction, Kurt shyly offers it to her, telling her Lise can have it if she likes it that much. However, Kurt warns her to be careful because he packed quite a lot of magic power into the blade. Lise thanks Kurt for the gift, but even though he is completely oblivious about his talents, he definitely knows what a forced smile looks like. It's obvious that something is bothering Lise, and truth be told, Kurt has been noticing it for a while now, so he asks her directly if someone is targeting her. Lise is surprised that Kurt figured it out, but she admits he is right and apologizes for all the trouble she has caused. Kurt tells her there is no need to apologize, but Lise still feels awful because everyone keeps getting dragged into danger because of her. Right now, Shia is even out there risking her life just for Lise's sake. Although Kurt figured out that someone's after her, he still has no clue that Lise is actually a princess, or that keeping her safe is a matter of national security. All Kurt knows is that Shia went off to handle something near the ruins, and he vaguely recalls how Gulnova once drew graffiti all over those same ruins. so Kurt, misconnecting the dots, assumes that Yuli Xia must be battling some crazy graffiti artist who's been stalking Lise. His conclusion is way off the mark, but it doesn't change the fact that Yuli Xia is fighting for Lise's sake, and Kurt absolutely hates the feeling of being powerless to help her because his combat skills are trash. Kurt can't stand sitting here doing nothing while the people he cares about are in danger, and Lise feels the same. Lise hates the idea of others putting themselves at risk just to protect her, and Lise would much rather fight for herself if she had the strength to do it. Since Lise brings it up, Kurt casually suggests that the two of them should just go out and catch the culprit themselves. Lise is immediately on board with the idea, but she points out one major problem. The city is completely surrounded by monsters right now. So how are they even going to get outside? Kurt, without missing a beat, tells her that's not an issue because he has his ways of getting around problems like this. Meanwhile, out on the battlefield, Yuli Xia suddenly shivers, sensing deep in her gut that Kurt is probably about to do something insane again. Back at the mansion, Lise was preparing herself for battle when she realized she hadn't yet tested the enchanted blade Kurt had given her. Lise was curious to see what kind of magic it held, so she raised it above her head, but to her wonder nothing occurred. At that moment, Kurt stepped into the room to ask if Lise was finished getting ready, and when she turned to face him, it was clear that the magic sword had activated something. At the same time, Yuli Xia and Alriad were still forcing their way through the horde of undead. Thanks to the diversion squad, the number of creatures had been reduced, but plenty remained, and Yuli Xia had relied on those magic crystals for quite some time, leaving her nearly out. Just then, Alriad was struck in the abdomen by one of the monsters. Yuli Xia attempted to assist him, but she was quickly overwhelmed by enemies, unable to reach for a crystal in time to defend herself. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Kanz and the others arrived to rescue her. They had heard about the situation, so as soon as they completed their mission, they returned as quickly as possible. They eventually located the source from which the monsters were being summoned. Yuli Xia used one of the magic crystals to eliminate all the nearby creatures, clearing a path to the building's entrance. Yuli Xia handed Alriad some of Kurt's restorative potion to help him recover from his injury, and once he was fully healed, she prepared to advance. More creatures had started emerging from the building, but Kanz and the others handled them, allowing Yuli Xia and Alriad to proceed inside without interference. At the same time, deep within the ruins, Marlphus was still having her mana drained, and at this rate, she was inevitably going to perish. But the demon paid no mind. However, what caught Demon's attention was that the humans were holding their ground against the monsters, performing far better than he had anticipated. Demon was particularly impressed by Yuli Xia and Alriad, since they had already managed to enter the ruins, so he decided to confront them directly. As Yuli Xia and Alriad made their way down the corridors, they eventually discovered the spawning ground for the undead, so she threw one of Kurt's magic crystals into the chamber, completely eradicating the creatures and whatever incantation had been sustaining the summoning. Yuli Xia was genuinely astonished that everything had gone so smoothly, but of course, things were never that easy because moments later the demon manifested before them, forcing them to confront it directly. Yuli Xia rushed forward wielding one of the magic crystals as a weapon against the demon. However, while the crystal's power clearly connected, it achieved nothing, since the demon declared that it possessed limitless health. Alriad was skeptical, so he attempted to slash the demon across the midsection, yet it had no effect whatsoever. The wound on the demon's body healed itself almost immediately, not because the demon truly had infinite health, but because it was sucking Marlphus's mana to regenerate, draining her energy at an alarming rate. Then the demon remarked to Alriad and Yuli Xia that they were rather impressive compared to the average humans it had encountered, but in the end they remained no threat to it, and the same applied to all their allies fighting outside. No matter how desperately they struggled to defend the city, they would inevitably fall before the relentless tide of undead. Alriad firmly countered, declaring that none of his comrades would ever fall to a mere monster, but the demon replied that he could simply summon additional waves until they were utterly overwhelmed. Even the three battling outside the ruins wouldn't survive the next assault he planned to unleash, yet Yuli Xia and Alriad were determined to prevent that outcome. The two of them launched a simultaneous attack, with Yuli Xia severing the demon's head while Alriad drove his blade through its heart. But the demon nonchalantly retrieved his head and continued speaking. Demon announced his intention to massacre all the knights, then target the princess next. For his amusement, he considered sparing Yuli Xia and Alriad, letting them live just long enough to watch Lise suffer a slow, agonizing death. Yuli Xia was unwilling to let that fate unfold, yet she had no idea how to stop it. Nothing they did was working, and even Kurt's magic crystals hadn't been enough to defeat the demon. At the same time, Marlphus had resigned herself to her fate. Marlphus' strength was so depleted that even if she somehow escaped the magic circle, Marlphus wouldn't have the energy to flee. On top of that, Thanks to the curse the bishop inflicted on her, Marlphys hadn't eaten anything for several days, leaving her weaker and hungrier than she ever felt. Marlphys silently wished she could experience the taste of Kurt's cooking one final time before she passed, and Marlphys even began to hallucinate because she was convinced she could hear Kurt's voice calling out to her. But it wasn't a hallucination because Kurt and Lise had just entered the chamber. Marlphys was utterly stunned to see Kurt here and even more astonished that he had brought the princess. Marlphys suspected that Kurt had figured out she was somehow involved in the scheme to assassinate Lise, and that's why he brought the princess here, to make her witness it firsthand. But in reality, Kurt hadn't even known Marlphys was here until he arrived. Then Kurt questioned Marlphys, asking if she was the one targeting Lise, but Marlphys explained that she had been expelled from the church and manipulated into this situation by Bishop Tristan. Kurt and Lise both heard her explanation, but their minds were processing completely different interpretations. Lise quickly realized that Tristan must be the mastermind behind all the assassination plots against her, while Kurt assumed Marlphys had simply been scribbling graffiti everywhere because she was upset about being cast out. Marlphys had no clue what Kurt meant, and neither did Lise, but regardless, Lise still supported whatever Kurt said, even if it didn't make any sense. Then Kurt asked Marlphys if she had any idea where Ulysses was. Marlphys didn't recognize the name Ulysses, but she did recall spotting two adventurers making their way through earlier, so they were probably on the floor above this one. Kurt thanked her for the information and immediately turned to search for Ulysses, fully intending to leave Marlphys behind since he still believed the magic circle was nothing more than meaningless graffiti. However, Lise stopped him and asked if he could help clean up the magic circle, while she went to find Ulysses herself. Kurt tried to talk her out of it, warning that it would be dangerous for her to go alone, but Lise reminded him that he had given her a magic sword, so she'd be fine. Kurt finally agreed and let her go, and while Lise headed off, he somehow found a mop and a bucket and prepared to begin cleaning. Marlphys thought Kurt had completely lost his mind, knowing full well that a magic circle couldn't simply be erased with plain water and a mop. But Kurt, oblivious to what impossible meant, casually wiped the magic circle clean. The moment the circle was broken, the demon instantly realized his mana supply had been severed, so he could no longer afford to absorb any more attacks. Demon quickly evaded as Ulysses and Atelier launched their strikes. Neither of them understood what had changed, but the fact that the demon was dodging now meant it was actually afraid of being wounded. Then Ulysses reached into her bag for the last remaining magic crystal, determined to end the fight once and for all, but the demon knocked it from her hand before she could activate it. Without that crystal, their chances of victory grew thin. The demon was preparing to fight in earnest finally, but suddenly Lise appeared and called out to Ulysses. Since Lise had been the demon's intended target from the start, it immediately drove its blade through her, killing her on the spot, then laughed at how reckless she was for coming here alone. However, to its shock, Lise's body dissolved into a swarm of butterflies, revealing that what it had slain was merely a decoy. The demon couldn't comprehend it, convinced it had struck down the real Lise, but what it attacked was nothing more than an illusion produced by the Sword of Confusion. As its name implies, this blade generates illusions capable of bewildering any foe, whether by showing disjointed, senseless images or, as in this case, creating a flawless replica of Lise. After that, the demon attempted to kill Lise multiple times, but each strike simply passed through another illusion. While the demon remained preoccupied with chasing these false images, the true Lise had quietly made her way to the magic crystal Ulysses had dropped earlier. Then Lise smashed the crystal, and the explosive surge of energy annihilated the demon completely. Since the demon had been sustaining the undead horde the moment he perished, all the monsters also vanished. At last the threat was eliminated, and the city's people could finally breathe a sigh of relief, knowing they were safe. But Ulysses was furious with Lise for putting herself in such danger. Lise apologized for coming without permission, but confessed that she couldn't keep hiding while others fought to protect her. Ulysses remained frustrated, yet knew she had no real right to scold Lise. After all, if Lise had not intervened when she did, the demon would have slain both Ulysses and Atelier. Atelier wanted to personally thank Lise for rescuing him, but Lise told him that wasn't necessary because he had fought with even greater resolve than she had. Lise thanked him for all his efforts in defending the city and promised she would reward him for his bravery. Meanwhile, Kurt had just finished erasing the last traces of the magic circle. But with the circle gone, Marlphys's curse still lingered, preventing her from consuming any food, meaning it was only a matter of time before she succumbed to starvation. At that moment, Kurt offered her some of his lunch, recognizing how hungry Marlphys must be, and Marlphys deeply appreciated the gesture. But if Marlphys were to eat it, the curse would simply force her to vomit it back up. Even so, Marlphys chose to eat it anyway, just so she could savor the taste of Kurt's cooking one final time before the end. But as soon as Marlfus takes that first bite, she suddenly realizes she can eat it without any issue, and within seconds, the curse affecting her stomach fades away entirely. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that Kurt's food lifted the curse, but this moment marks the first time Marlfus truly comprehends what Kurt is capable of. Marlfus thinks back to everything Kurt had done for her and the rest of the Flaming Dragon Party, and it finally dawns on her. Their group had been strong only because Kurt had supported them from the shadows. Feeling genuine regret, Marlfus offers him a heartfelt apology for how she had treated him in the past. Marlfus is still kind of awful as a person, but at least she is finally recognizing Kurt's worth, and that's gotta count for something. Of course, that doesn't spare Marlfus from facing the consequences, because two of Mimiko's agents soon arrive to place her under arrest for her involvement in the assassination. Marlfus calls out to Kurt for help, so Kurt simply assures her that he'll visit her in prison with food as often as she likes. After Marlfus has been dragged off to prison, Lise approaches Kurt and asks if he is alright. Kurt responds that he is fine, and if anything, Kurt is more concerned about Yuli and the others who have been fighting. But Lise reassures him they're all okay, since they had each taken some of the healing item Kurt had prepared. Once everyone returns from the battlefield, Kurt invites them all to a celebratory feast at the mansion. But after they sit down to eat, the soldiers remain silent, quietly devouring their meals without saying a word. Kurt starts to worry that maybe they're just forcing themselves to eat out of politeness, since they don't seem particularly cheerful, but Alriad quickly clears up the misunderstanding. Alriad tells Kurt that it's quite the opposite. They're silent because this is the best food they've ever tasted, and they focus entirely on eating as much as possible. Kurt is relieved and happy that they're enjoying the meal. While everyone continues eating, Lise calls Alriad to introduce him to Kurt officially. Kurt recognizes him as the foreman who oversaw repairs on the city walls, but Lise explains that Alriad also serves as the leader responsible for governing the city and its people. At that moment, a series of fireworks lit up the sky, leaving everyone in awe of the dazzling display. Kurt explains that he thought it would be nice to pair the meal with the show, so Kurt arranged the fireworks in advance. Speaking of the food, Alriad mentions that his injuries miraculously healed after eating, but Kurt doesn't see what's so surprising about it. After all, back in his village it was completely normal to recover after enjoying a good meal, and he can't believe that answer is even real. So now what will happen next? Subscribe to our channel to find out what will happen next. Friends, before we wrap up, we've recently launched a membership program where you can enjoy perks like early access to videos and exclusive content just for members, and many more to enhance your interactions. If you're interested, consider joining our membership. To enjoy these benefits, check out the link in the description to join. So friends, if you enjoyed our recap video, please like and share it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.